Hello, all you scabies. Welcome to Great Answers Podcast. I'm very excited today to have a extended interview with Parker Ropeboi, who is a fantastic kinkster and teacher and has a lot of interesting things to say. And I hope you enjoy what we're going to say. I'm going to make this intro pretty short because of the fact that it's a long interview. But first, I do have to acknowledge my wonderful, wonderful sponsors. TwistedMonk.com makes fantastic hemp rope. It is the rope that I used for my daughter's wedding. No, I did not tie anyone up for my daughter's wedding, but the fact is she asked for rope at her wedding to be used in the decorations, and we were able to, as she put it, he had the perfect purple and the perfect blue for what they wanted for the decorations. And so if you're getting married and want to use rope, can't recommend anybody better than Twisted Monk. But he also makes fantastic other things like bondage rope and offers free teaching online videos on basic bondage. So you not only get the wonderful stuff that he sells, but also you get to learn how to use it for free. I also never travel without my monk sack, which sounds dirtier than it really is. It's the best way that I can think of to carry rope. And Naya and I have been playing more lately with some of his candles, various candles that he does sell for various whatever sundry uses. I suppose some people could use it just for lighting. We use it to drip wax on Naya and make her come a lot. So it all balances out in the end. So Twisted Monk is a fantastic teacher, fantastic sponsor, and I really appreciate him taking care of this. We also get to introduce a new sponsor. And I'm really excited about this one, too, because this is something that gave me the opportunity to do something that I did not think I would get to do. And that is, I was never able to learn from Yukimura Haruki. I had heard a lot about him. I had tangentially, we had friends who were in common, but I never got to actually meet him or learn from him. And unfortunately, he passed away. But I now can go to JapaneseBound.com and I can download a digital download of his final DVD, which is an English translation of his instructional videos. And I can, look at that. And I know it's not going to be the same as actually being in person with him. He was a remarkable man. From everyone I know who has learned from him has said it was fantastic. So I know it's not the same, but it has the advantage of I don't have to pay thousands of dollars to go to Japan. And I can still be supporting, his legacy by purchasing his work and then learning from it at my own speed in our comfort of our own home and things like that. So JapaneseBound.com has that. Has a lot of instructional videos, Nureki videos, how to tie, and those are cheap. Like one volume of the Nureki how to tie is $15, which, is really very easy to afford in terms of just being able to, more than going to an event or things like that. And let's be fair, there is also, things like Akechi Denki stuff, and there is porn. Let's remember these guys were people who created porn. So you can also find things like Yukimura Haruki Rope Virgins, which is I'm just doing a quick view here of what that is. It has lots of pictures of women tied up. What a surprise. I'm also suspecting that there are people who are new to rope, not virgins, actually. Well, who knows? Either way, the selection is wide. The person who runs it is Zetsu from Los Angeles, and he is adding new videos all the time and has featured ones. The featured ones right now are Kawakami Yu, private training record, which let's see, I'm not sure if that is. This is follows the progression of training for a young female slave as she is subjected to a strict regime of control, bondage, and discipline as she is trained to become the perfect slave. And the picture has quite extensive rope bondage, as well as mouth gags and drool, if that's your thing. Wow, looking at, they have lots of preview images. Looks like it includes some nipple torture and some anal play. I mean, it's quite extensive. So if that's your thing, which I'm guessing it probably is, considering, you know, you're listening to this podcast, I would recommend checking out JapaneseBound.com and going there. And even if it's just a matter of dropping them a line and saying, hey, thanks for doing it. They also have an affiliate program. So, hey, you can even you throw a little money both ways and go to greatanswer.com, where the affiliate links for both Twisted Monk and for Japanese Bound will be available. So thank you, both of my sponsors, for doing that. And now, aside from the fact that I'm going to tell you, as usual, you should go to gru.space. We have 4 grus in a row: Chicago, South Carolina, Rochester, and Pittsburgh coming up in March. And before that, I will be at the Leather Leadership Conference and at the Consent Symposium at NIHU. If you go to nihu.org, you'll be able to find out more about how to come to that Consent Symposium, where I am co-presenting with Lonnie Angel about various consent practices. And gru.space is where you can find out about the GRU. And of course, you're going to hear Parker here in a moment, who is one of the many presenters at ROPECRAFT. Now, we've extended the February prices at ROPECRAFT through Wednesday, the 15th of March, the Ides of March, and that's so we can get the class descriptions out. We published a couple of them in our newsletter, and you're going to hear about 3 more at the end of this podcast. So keep online for that. And for now, until March 15th, 2017, you can still get tickets for only $199 for all of ROPECRAFT. Such a deal it is. That's in Chicago, and that will be Memorial Day weekend. That's the end of May. So now, without further ado, let's go and talk with Parker. Parker, nice to talk to you again here on, well, I can't say the Ropecast anymore. We're not the Ropecast. It's Great Answers Podcast now.
It's a pleasure to be here on the new and improved, no longer Ropecast Great Answer Podcast.
Yeah, it's quite an adventure.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I mean, you've been on the Ropecast before. I know in various, sometimes as just as a commenter briefly, and sometimes as an actual interview. But I actually really appreciated that you got in touch with me and suggested this topic that we're going to first talk about. But before we do that, there may be 1 or 2 people out there who don't know you by reputation or having attended one of your classes. So
Sure.
If somebody said, who are you and why are you teaching things, what would you answer?
Well, I got into rope after initially doing various queer and kinky, sexy explorations of bodies and pleasures in my, younger days. And eventually met someone named Topologist, who was my neighbor and was really into rope. I thought, before then, maybe you just tie someone up, like tie someone's ankle so they don't kick me in the face when I'm spanking their butt. Something just very, very haphazard, and maybe it sort of comes undone, and then you just retie it maybe some different way. But it, with cotton cheap clothesline from the corner hardware store. So Topologist was really my gateway drug into the wider world of shibari, and who, first encouraged me to go outside of my local community, which at the time I was living in Boston. to explore events like ShibariCon and learn from various other people. And so that was now almost 10 years ago, I think. That was 2008. And so that's when I really started getting into suspension, and I particularly like to practice on myself. And I would learn any rope tie and try to just do it on myself and practice suspending myself, and then came up with various other ways that were more efficient or effective or
scary.
Easier
scary.
to get out of.
Let's add scary in there.
I have a tendency to I like when people will say, oh, you can't do this. And I'll think, maybe there is a way to do that. Let me mess around with that.
Yeah.
I'll try not to hurt myself. But, if I do, then it seemed that ethically, I fully consented to whatever thing I was going to try, and sort of went in with a full knowledge of the likely ways it would fail, and how I would prevent them or try to mitigate those risks. And so
I don't
there are various things that I've experimented on with myself that I would not subject somebody else to, because I would just feel horrible if I caused harm to another person, whereas if I did it to myself and I fall or something, I'll be like, well, I guess I knew that was an outcome. But.
Yeah, you and I don't believe you and I have ever actually had a scene with each other in the many years we've known each other. But
I did tie you once in a class, though, at Shibari.
Yes, that's true. I do. That's right. That was fun. But
I think you hated it, but you were very nice.
It was not you.
Because it was rope.
Yes, exactly. Actually, you are one of the. I've said before, I've been tied by some of the best riggers out there, and I just have not found the enjoyment of rope. But I will say that you did give me one of the edgiest scenes I've ever had by having me video your self-suspension drop at the first Nerix.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I was so thinking that I was about to videotape one of my friends dying. Yeah, it was very edgy. So yeah, you also I should also add, you have a couple of other things that stick out in my mind. And
Can
one
we
of them,
clarify what we mean by drop, though? I don't want people
Sure.
thinking that I fell all the way onto the ground.
No.
But that I climbed up extremely high, maybe 16, 18 feet in the air, something like that. And I had the uplines wrapped around myself 1.5 times. So then I did a 1.5 flip down, end over end down to a still suspended but much lower down suspended position.
Right.
And it was a very static line that was a synthetic rope, but still not, it was nylon. It was braided nylon. It was not a climbing rope.
You can put all the faction you want. It was scary.
My point is, it didn't have any bounce, so it was still a rough landing into a suspension.
Yep.
And it was kind of, I don't know.
And let's
inelegant, but
it was also
work in a rudimentary way as planned.
Yeah, I believe you said also that was one of the first times you had tried that too.
No, that's not true. It was basically the first time I'd done that in about 2 years. So 2 years prior to that, I'd seen people doing that sort of move in a lot of aerial arts like cordelice and silks, and thought, well, I bet I could do something that's like that in a shibari type rope suspension. And it would probably have to be a self-suspension just to be able to get up high enough that, if in a partner suspension where the rigger is standing on the ground, you probably can't, unless you're using a block and tackle or some other kind of system like that, which I don't know. It seemed easier to me to again, just do it myself, on myself as a self-suspension. So I did, I don't know if I should say who, but a very generous person offered to be a kind of lab rope bottom for part of that, and also experienced the kind of rough drop into a suspension, that like, just landing on the rope it's, digs in a lot.
Yeah, just a bit.
He's very kind in subjecting himself to that in the initial development stages. And then, right at that first NARIX, Amy Morgan had shown her version of how to do that. And so I made me think, oh, right, I was doing stuff like that a couple of years ago and then eventually stopped because it was, I don't know, involved too complicated measuring. And I don't know. Sometimes I'll spend a lot of time labbing something out to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then maybe I get to a point where I figure out a way that works well enough. And then I'm not interested in the particular thing anymore.
Right.
So it wasn't the first time I had done it at NARIX. It was just the first time I'd done it in
a couple of years.
A couple of years since I'd been doing it a while.
Well, then fine. It was just maybe it was entirely my own nerves, but it was scary. I also have to give you credit. You do have at least one leather title that I know of. Maybe others I don't, but you are a Dirty Pig title holder.
Yes, the fake leather title of Dirtiest Pig.
Yes,
by Lee Harrington at the fake leather bar, the Dirty Pig at Dark Odyssey.
But you do realize that now it is a patched title.
It has become a real title. What a transformation.
I know it's.
I have to. But the credit all goes to Naughty M, who allowed me to, among other things, chew up a cherry pie and.
Yes, I didn't see it, but it is legendary.
A pie involved.
Yes,
she's an amazing person and also very generous and lovely and giving person. But she deserves that title as much as I do, for sure.
Definitely. Okay, so let's. I think we have definitely established your cred. Certainly, beyond, as usual in this podcast, people are like, well, let me justify my existence. I'm like, look, it's just a podcast. You're here. This is good enough. But in particular,
I should say for the topic that I had suggested talking about, I'm actually not at all qualified to talk about that, in that I'm not a lawyer. I don't work in law enforcement. I'm basically just somebody who tries to read the available information that I can find and make sense of it. But
right. And that's a useful thing. Yeah, none of what follows should constitute legal advice, but is more of a sort of a, hey, maybe here's something we should be more risk aware about, and if it applies to you, you should definitely do more research than what you're listening to right now. Would that be fair enough? Yeah. Yes. So good. With that caveat in mind, what did you want to bring up?
So I think it's amazing that you have been doing these podcasts recently about security and information security, digital security, and having people keep in mind that their communications and their electronic devices could be read by law enforcement. Trying to secure that more, especially maybe when going through various kinds of checkpoints at borders or at airports and that sort of thing. But I have seen a lot of people dealing with items that are considered weapons, such as stun guns or maybe something like certain kinds of knives that are over a certain length, and also like police batons, brass knuckles. There are various weapons laws, and they vary by state, they vary by municipality. People may not realize that they are violating these laws, and that if somebody just has a device like that in their car or on their person and they're stopped by the police, then maybe you might be committing a felony gun charge without even realizing it. And people I have seen advertised on FetLife community educational events for electricity play, in which they say, we're going to have stun guns there, and people can all, try them on each other. And in states in which stun guns are, possession or transport of a stun gun is a felony. And that concerns me, because maybe you can speak to what happened at this GRU that you had mentioned.
Sure. This was this is the Detroit GRU. I originally thought it was Ann Arbor. but it was actually in Detroit, the one and only Detroit Grew. And for reasons that I will not go into here, the owners of the venue had called the police to come. And when they showed up, they came ready to drag us out. They had their search gloves on. The lead policeman was this very, Viking-looking guy with crosses on his collar tabs, which really made it especially fun because I was wearing a bondage shirt, of course. And they came in, and it was luck of the draw. A moment, an hour before, we had "Do Not Go Gently" suspended by one ankle, dipping an Oreo, naked, dipping an Oreo into a glass of milk, and various other things going on. But at that particular moment, all of the sessions were discussion-based sessions. And so everybody was clothed. Sure, there was equipment out, but everybody was just kind of sitting there talking. And so I started doing some fast talking with the police and saying, we're doing relationship exercises and trust, exercises and things like basically justifying our existence. And he was actually very friendly to it. What I didn't know was that when they had walked in, Twisted View from Pittsburgh had seen them, and he had gone over and sat on his duffel bag. And the reason he had done that is because he had in that duffel bag, I'm not sure exactly what they were, but I believe they were tasers, or cattle prods or things like that.
Well, those are all really distinct, especially in the state of Michigan. So maybe.
Yeah, I know that he said he knew they were illegal, whatever they were. And the other funny thing.
But cattle prods are legal everywhere.
Okay. Then it wasn't that. Then it must have been stun guns. Okay.
But I think that's important for people to know that if you I think that stun guns are really hot. I love the sound. I love how they feel. They don't cause marks. They're very intense sensations. I think they're awesome, but I don't own any at the moment because I live in a state where that is illegal, and I would rather just not take that risk. But I have a cattle prod. A cattle prod is considered agricultural equipment. You can buy it anywhere. You can, order it online and have it delivered to your address anywhere. And if anyone finds it on you, it's, I suppose that somebody, that there's always the possibility that might change, especially if, in the act of using it, there's probably a risk of, an assault charge or something like that. But that's sort of a separate issue. Simply the possession of it is not it's not considered a firearm in the way that a taser or a stun gun is. Right.
Well, I can tell you, I recently got my concealed carry permit here in Wisconsin just to see how easy it might or might not be to do so. And one of the interesting, it was very, very easy to do.
And that's a shall issue state? Meaning that if you meet certain criteria, like you're over a certain age and you haven't committed a felony and you pay them whatever the amount of money is, then they basically automatically give you
you do have to go through have gone through some training at some point, and the fact that I was a Marine justified it. So I sent them a copy of my Marine enlistment proof, and they said sure. But one of the things that surprised me was that it was for more than a firearm. It was I'm licensed to carry a baton, a police baton, and also a electrical device is the way they put it. And if I was ever planning on doing it, I would have to look up more of what that exactly meant and if that had limitations on voltages. But interestingly, it did not cover knives. So apparently, the knife cannot be a concealed weapon, but a taser or a police baton would be considered that. So and in Michigan,
you also need to have a concealed. They call it a concealed permit license, but it's the same as a CCW. It's just what they call it in Michigan, but it is so one has to get the permit as you would for a standard firearm, and then go to a licensed seller of tasers. And the way that the law is defined, it used to be up until 2012, any kind of electrical device like tasers, stun guns, that sort of thing was prohibited for people who are not in law enforcement or corrections officers. I'm talking about, for personal use. And then that was changed. So the way it is now is that you need to have the concealed permit license and then buy it from a particular registered seller of tasers only. And there are different, there's actually a specific civilian standard for what civilians are allowed to carry. It's a taser that it has a shorter radius. So these are the kind that that shoot out something. And when they shoot at a shorter range, I think it's 15 feet and it's a 30-second discharge of electricity, whereas the police model can go over 30 feet and shoot more electricity for a longer.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Is that different than the ones that just that have the two electrodes you have to touch somebody to?
Right, those are still illegal. They are not included in what that permit allows you to carry. So any of those, which are the kind that, those are the only kind I've ever seen used for, kinky activities, the kind that directly touch on the skin, that just have the two prongs, or sometimes they have multiple two prongs. Maybe there's 6 prongs of, 3 pairs of 2, but those, and the reason why is because the only kind that are legal in Michigan are, they shoot out this confetti that has a serial number on it that can be traced back to the point of sale. So
wow.
Yes. And so if you buy other kinds of stun guns that don't meet those criteria, even if you have the concealed pistol license, that's still considered a felony weapons charge, as I understand the current law.
Okay.
And Michigan is rather confusing. There also has been a lot of court action and law changes, even in the last year. There was a case in Iowa last year in which the Supreme Court of Iowa upheld the conviction of a woman who had she had been carrying in her purse a stun gun that actually did not work. It was non-functional, but it was a stun gun, and she was still convicted because that was considered to be a dangerous weapon, even though it did not work.
Right. Do you think that would fall in if somebody said, well, yeah, I do gunplay, but I use a replica, so it's it's totally safe. It doesn't actually fire, but maybe if it looked like it could, that could be considered to be.
I mean, like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I wouldn't want to speculate or extrapolate, but it does seem it's the same kind of logic that was used there. That basically, that whether stun guns are dangerous per se, is it has to do with this historical tradition of prohibiting the carrying of what they call, quote, dangerous and unusual weapons, unquote. And unusual is a very interesting word.
Yes.
And I should add that, so there is, by people who support both sort of like Second Amendment carry rights in general, or sort of overlapping but not, but worth distinguishing movement that is interested in expanding the legality of non-lethal weapons as an alternative to lethal weapons. Like, it's better to carry a stun gun than a gun, because if you use it, you're less likely to kill the person that you're defending yourself against. There's those are both movements that exist that have been bringing to court these various cases in various jurisdictions, and also pushing to overturn, especially in Maryland. There used to be several counties that banned stun guns altogether, and I believe one of those counties no longer does, and one is, I think, Baltimore County is maybe still in the process. Or
so what I'm getting, what I'm getting from this is that you can't assume that what you're used to at home is going to apply at your event, the next event you go to. And you
Sure,
can't
like
assume that when you buy something at an event, because I see a lot of vendors selling these kinds of things, especially guns, you can't assume that you can just take it back with you and not get in trouble.
it may. I mean, I have been. I don't know if I should. I won't say what event, but so in Illinois, with some restrictions, you can buy stun guns, but in Chicago, it is prohibited to purchase or carry a stun gun. And at an event in Chicago, there were people who were openly selling and buying and using stun guns, and it was not. There was, that, and as if the law didn't apply, and I don't know. So I don't think that these laws are necessarily being enforced. I mean, I even hear people in states, Michigan for one, at flea markets and such, where these are bought and sold. You probably wouldn't see it out, in a more standard brick and mortar store, or an internet seller probably wouldn't mail it to you at an address that's in one of these states. But that doesn't mean that they aren't sold.
Right.
But it's something to keep, don't assume that because somebody is selling it, it is legal to sell it or buy it.
Yes. So the follow-up question is where, I mean, you obviously have done your research on this. Does every state have a website or a topic or a section that would list what is legal and what isn't? So
there are a few websites that sort of advocate the use of stun guns. I should add, none of these are remotely kink friendly. These are all assuming you're using stun guns for self-defense. So that's also a really important distinction.
Yes, definitely.
That it is legal to carry a stun gun under certain conditions for self-defense. It is also probably illegal to use it on a person for some reason other than self-defense. And, then we get into all kinds of other issues. But just in terms of whether having a stun gun in your glove compartment or something is illegal, I would say that there are a few places to go. Not all of these are the most up to date though, so it's good to check in your specific state.
Wait, you mean just because it's on the internet, it might not be true?
Even if it's in the statutes, it might not be valid because there might be a law and then another law that, supersedes it or adds something to it. So you might be reading a law that is still technically the law, but then it's supplemented by another law that, adds in exceptions. There's a website called stungunbuyersguide.com, but its information is from 2013. There's another website that is called planetstungun.com, and it has a map which is I can see is also not fully up to date. Because of changes that have happened just in the last year. There's a website that's called criminaldefenselawyer.com that has a number of articles about states and different states and firearms and stun guns included in that.
Gotcha.
But like I said, and in some states it's also quite vague. So for example, Massachusetts bans in all cases, and again, I'm excluding things like law enforcement, corrections officers, et cetera. But, if you're just a civilian carrying and for your own personal use, stun guns are illegal. However, there was a recent case, the Caetano case, in which the Supreme Court, someone was carrying a stun gun for self-defense. It was a situation where there was some history of partner abuse, and I think even a protective order, like a restraining order against this person's former partner, and she was carrying a stun gun for self-defense purposes and was convicted of this weapons charge, this firearms charge, because the stun gun is considered, it's under this heading of firearms. So the Supreme Court, it removed that conviction, but it did not overturn the law. So what happens next? I don't know sort of what that means for Massachusetts, because the law is still on the books, which means it could be enforced. But this last time in this particular case, because of the facts of that case, that person, she does not have that conviction anymore.
Which ties neatly into the other thing that I wanted to bring up, is that, you and I are talking about the way the laws are, and that all applies when you're actually in court. But when you're actually standing in front of a police officer and they are, talking to you about things, if you're sitting here going, they're saying you're under arrest for this thing, and you say, well, no, I read on Planet Stun Gun that it's okay to carry this in this that's not going to necessarily go so well. Mm-hmm. Your best bet in most cases is to cooperate physically with the police, but also not to talk as much as possible.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Because you can get arrested for lying to them, but you can't get arrested for not talking to them. Or I should say, you can't be charged with not talking. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, and it would definitely not be good to lie about it either. It's much better to explain it. I
wanted to mention one more case, which was mm-hmm. also relatively recently. This one's from 2014 in Connecticut. So this is the Supreme Court of Connecticut, and I don't know how you say his name. I think it's DeCiccio. I'm not sure. But so that didn't involve stun guns as such. It was police batons, but it was mm-hmm. someone who was found with police batons in his car. And
multiple, huh? So maybe
so it was a collection, and it was in the context of moving. So in that case, my understanding of what the ruling is that he was permitted to have this item in his residence and to transport it when moving from one residence to another with all of his other belongings, transport it for that purpose. But it's still illegal to be walking around or driving around with such a weapon for perhaps any other purpose than that. But if it's just in your own home, not doing anything, not leaving the home, and perhaps only going in the car when you are moving the entire home from one location to another, then at least in that context, it was determined that was basically it struck down that ban in that context. But it's not clear to me if they'll just change the law so that it's mm-hmm. Still going to prohibit those kinds of items in other contexts.
Yeah, well, and current trends, if you can call them such, for the administration is that local law enforcement is going to be having more power and more discretion. So it is definitely important, especially in terms of knowing the length of knife blades and things like that. That mm-hmm. you can be what is okay and what isn't. I found out the hard way that a Kubotan, the little self-defense rod thing that they make, it looks like a little tiny black baton kind of situation. If you have one of those with a point on it, it is illegal to have in the United Kingdom. That's considered a deadly weapon. If it had not had a point to it, if it had just a regular flat top, it would have been fine. But the point made it apparently fall into deadly weapon. As a very, very polite but very strong tattooed, looked like he was just back from Afghanistan and was carrying a semi-automatic rifle, explained to me at the airport. So yeah, it's important to have these ideas. Anything else? I wanted to move on to talk about your Toronto trip, but anything else before we do that about this kind of weapon that you would recommend for people, other than just do your research and be risk aware of what you're using?
Well, I just wanted to, but just because it just happened a couple of days ago, there was a decision in Maryland, so that the counties in which, like Baltimore County and Howard County, were sued. After the March 2016, the Caetano case, in which the Supreme Court said the Massachusetts arguments for the ban on stun guns are rejected, but they don't actually fully overturn the ban itself as unconstitutional. That sort of opened the door for a lot of other lawsuits against municipal and state level stun gun bans, including this one in Maryland that was just decided that overturned that that ban. So I don't know if there are going to be more appeals, but that is what I understand. The current decision, this is just from last week, is that those counties that previously had banned stun guns in Maryland, that officers cannot bring criminal charges against individuals now for violating those stun gun bans. So that might be significant.
You know, it would really help if people had a legal fetish for doing this kind of thing, because you know, there's a part of me that's like, come on, I just want to have fun. You know, I just want to do the sexy stuff. But it gets really complicated.
Cattle prod.
Yeah, cattle prod. There's the answer.
Advice. Cattle prod. It's not exactly the same. It doesn't make the noise. Maybe there's. However, there is an app. There's a sound effect that you can get on your phone for the stun gun noise. So perhaps if you like the noise and the feeling of the make a recording stun gun noise, and then the cattle prod is
Riza Amnesia.
Exactly
Riza Amnesia revealed to me that the sound of a toothbrush, some electrical toothbrushes, sound a lot like a stun gun too, which we found out unexpectedly but quite delightfully.
Like with the crackling noise?
No, it was. I mean, I don't use stun guns. All I know is that she was sitting near me, and I turned on my electric toothbrush, and suddenly she was across the room, and I was like, "What happened?" And she said that another partner of hers had used stun guns, and that was what it sounded like to her. So, yeah, that was just a kind of a surprise. So, kind of as a wonderfully graceful segue here, you recently did a intensive in Toronto, which means you went across the border with rope and stuff, I imagine. So, first question is, was there any issues at the border and going or coming? And the other question is, how did the intensive go?
Well, I guess maybe I'll answer the second question first, which is that the intensive was amazing. I am so grateful to to Toronto Rope and to Ben Hart, who invited me out there, and to all the amazing participants in this 2-day self-suspension workshop that we held at the Subspace studio. It's very physically and technically challenging, and I try to pack as much content as I can into 2 days so that people get their money's worth and, you know, learn a lot. But it ends up being a lot of it can be very tiring, be very exhausting, and everybody made it through the whole thing, and it really impressed me. What a great group of people. I'm so excited to, you know, see what they end up getting up to in their own self-tying and self-suspending practices. Yeah.
And this is, please, people, don't flame me, because this is mainly a facetious joke. So how long should someone be able to plank before they do self-suspension?
So I guess, so the reason I assume you're asking is because this has been a kind of hot topic on the internet over the last 48 hours.
Rather than give my own opinion.
I will say that the piece of writing that I came across on FetLife that I thought was the best thing that I have read on this is by someone whose FetLife name is Frisky Bunny, who is not somebody that I know, but I just saw her writing, and I thought it was it really sort of captured the best response to it. It's called "Yeah, I plank, but not for you." And
That's a great title. Well, I'll put a link to it in the show notes for sure.
I would recommend people read it, because I think it just kind of shifts the discussion away from, not, oh, what should somebody do or what can I do, but like who is this person to tell all rope bottoms how to be the best rope bottom, like for him or something.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really rope bottom, because I don't like it very much.
Me too.
That's why I would say that I am a bad rope bottom. I would never say that anybody else is a bad rope bottom, but I would say that I am, mainly because I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I would say that that's maybe the only thing that would make somebody.
Oh, you know what? You know what I just realized?
For me, that's why I consider myself to be not a good rope bottom, because I don't like probably 95% of rope bottoming.
I think that I just realized this is you are the perfect epitome of one of the things that's always bothered me. There is this oftentimes a thing put out there of, well, I don't need a top, I self-suspend. And I'm thinking, couldn't it just as easily be, I don't need a bottom, I self-suspend? And because there seems to be this presumption in a lot of spaces that if you are doing self-suspension, you are bottoming to yourself, or that you are a bottom who is trying to do that. And I've always thought that it made a lot more sense to me. Well, it basically didn't make sense to me to have either way be there. Is that somebody that it's just as likely for a top to enjoy that. And I've met a few, and I think you are the first person that I've kind of gone, oh yes, you are someone who does not identify as a rope bottom, does not enjoy bottoming, but enjoys self-suspension and does a lot of it. And even from what I've been hearing you say, it's because you like topping yourself and then doing these things. Although, frankly, when you get into self-suspension, the whole idea of topping and bottoming just kind of falls out the window.
Yeah, I certainly don't think of it in those terms. I mean, I think that I certainly, in teaching and in interacting with and skill sharing with a lot of other people who do self-suspension, I think I more frequently encounter people who have bottoming experience, who have more bottoming experience in rope than tying other people, and that's how that's the bulk of their experience coming into self-tying. But I also encounter people who mostly tie others, and that's where they're coming from, and then are tying themselves. So I mean, I certainly see both, but I do see more people who are coming into it as bottoms. But I think that in many ways, like a lot of people who come into the scene might just start out as bottoms. The first time you walk into the room, it might be, maybe you don't have your own rope, maybe, this or that. So I don't know. It might be that a lot of people start out as bottoms, even if that's not where they end up. But, obviously it's different for everybody. It's different in every little rope scene in each community. But
are there particular...
I don't really think of I think of self-tying as a different thing that has different risks involved, and there are certainly crossover. There are a lot of skills and techniques that are relevant to self-tying that are also relevant to topping, or as in the sense of tying another person, or also to being tied by another person. But then there are also skills that are distinct to each of those three different activities. I realize I'm basically asking you to do the intensive in 5 minutes or less, but is there a particular set of skills that is specific to self-suspension or self-tying that doesn't carry over between the two, that might be something somebody needs to develop? I personally think of the when I've seen it, the safety considerations of if you're doing it alone, having a cell phone on your body and having your cutting... Oh, no, I would never advocate that. Don't tell people to trust cell phones. I would.
Good.
So let me just say, as a caveat to everything I'm going to say, these are my opinions, and I am not saying this is the one true way to do self-suspension, but I have very strong opinions that I would recommend based on my experience, and that I think are assuming a certain preference and hierarchy of risk. So, for example, I mean, if we're talking about a suspension situation rather than, just some tying that doesn't involve suspension, I think that whenever we're doing suspension, whether it's self-suspension, partner suspension, there are sort of two major categories of risk. One is falling, and the other is getting stuck in the air. And that how we tie will be balancing those risks. That I could tie super duper securely, so something is not going to get undone, and then reduce the, or maybe even, severely mitigate against the risk of falling. But maybe that means when you try to untie it at the moment that you want to get untied, maybe it takes longer, or there's a risk that it might get stuck, or it takes just more strength to untie something that's super duper securely tied, which means that you are accepting a greater risk of getting stuck in the air. And then vice versa, if I tie with extreme quick release, like, you just touch it and the knot falls apart, then that is definitely going to get untied immediately when you want to come down. So it's mitigating that getting stuck in the air risk, but it is accepting a higher risk of falling. And when I tie in partner suspension situations, I try to be somewhere in the middle of that range. So not at either extreme. And it, it varies depending on what is it, a main line or an auxiliary line, and what exact set of transitions are we doing, how long you're going to be in it, et cetera, et cetera. I sort of, it depends, but it's always, at neither extreme. And when I do self-suspension, everything that I tie is pretty much at the extreme end of the quick release, that is not wanting to risk getting stuck in the air, not wanting to risk being in the air for even seconds longer than necessary, and accepting a greater risk of falling. I mean, still, wanting to avoid that. And, I do tie off my lines. It's not as if I'm just hanging in a, open loop that I could fall out of, but not usually anyway. But that's because I want to be able to get out immediately. And injuries like nerve injuries tend to happen because you are in a bad position for too long in the air, and nerve injuries happen very quickly and they take a long time to heal. So that pretty much defines every choice that I make for self-suspension, including the choice to not suspend very high off the ground. I mean, I know we talked about this scenario where I was suspended very high, but that was, one in hundreds and hundreds of self-suspension. Like, it's not what I do.
Do you practice over a mat?
Not usually, but I also don't practice over, well, let me put it this way. I practice generally over puzzle mats, which I don't think are mats. It's not like if I was coming down from a high height at the speed of gravity onto my head, that would do anything helpful. But it's just, somewhat softer than the floor. Right. But I don't use crash mats because they're squishy, and it changes how high you are depending on how much pressure you put on it, which is actually makes getting the relative heights of lines more difficult to determine. So like the one thing that I know is consistent wherever I self-suspend, however high my hard point is or whatever type it is, no matter what I've been, doing in terms of my own body recently, is that I am always the same height. Like my weight might change, and certainly or my level of flexibility might change, my level of strength might change day to day, but I am always the same height. So that's one
constant.
One constant, yes, that I can rely upon in terms of gauging, how high to rig my hard point and how high to rig other lines in relation to that. So in scenarios in which that needs to be precise in order for certain transitions to work the way I want to, I don't want to do anything that's making the floor change heights in a way that I can't control.
Gotcha.
I do think it's often helpful to have something like a chair nearby. I think. Okay. So you'd mentioned a phone. I think that it's always. I don't think that phones are helpful because they take too long to get the person. Like if you need emergency assistance getting out of a self-suspension, you need it now. You don't need it like a phone call away. Okay. So I think that safe calls are just giving people a false sense of security, and it's you don't know if the person's going to pick up, or if it's the kind where you have to actually call someone and then they arrive. They might not pick up, they might not be there. If it's the kind where you say, oh, if you don't hear from me for another 20 minutes, then come to my house and break down the door. It still relies on the person to really do that, and it's good to. I just don't. I think if you think through the logical consequences of what is the thing that's going to fail, and what happens when that happens, I think that it's just too many steps for it to be a reliable backup.
What about cutting tools?
I think cutting tools are helpful, but I think that quick release knots are better. Okay. Because anything that you could drop it and then you would not have it anymore is not the best backup mechanism. So and even so in self-suspension, you don't have as much leverage. You don't have. I mean, you might not have any leverage if you're fully suspended, like hanging without being able to touch a floor or a wall or a top of a frame or a ceiling. Like if you literally are just hanging from a string in the air, unable to touch any other object, then there's not a lot you can do in terms of shifting weight. And if you drop something, then you don't have it anymore, and it's as if you never had it at all. So I'm hesitant to rely on anything that might disappear if I let go of it. But that being said, I do generally keep a safety cutter, like one of those Benchmade rope safety hooks with me, not on my person because it like digs in and I find that annoying. I had done that on occasion when it seemed, that was something that I might want to use and that I wasn't sure that I would be able to touch the floor. If I'm suspended low enough that I know that whatever happens, I'll be able to put a hand down on the floor, then having something on the floor I think is fine. But this is another reason to just suspend not very high.
Right.
But scissors, like safety shears, require a lot of hand strength, and they also only work one-handed on one direct, like they're right or left-handed. And
that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
So I imagine a scenario in which if I really need to cut myself down, maybe that also means that like my hand's not working anymore. So I want to make sure that if I have a cutting device, it's the one that requires the least hand strength, and that I think probably if I could like just put my finger in the cutting device and like shove my arm in one direction, like even with some sort of nerve injury, that would probably work. Luckily, I've never had to do that. So this is all just
Knock on wood.
I like to play out all the worst case scenarios that can happen. I find that actually very comforting for me. And then imagine, okay, so, well, what if when I'm inverted and I'm wearing, and this like my shirt falls over my face and gets tangled around me and then I vomit, would I choke on my own vomit? Is that something I need to be like? I really just try to map out all of the
extensive.
terrible things that might happen, and just even and put some sort of estimate on how likely they might be, and what I would do if they occurred.
Wow.
But
that goes far. Yeah, that goes further than I would usually go. But that's a good point. I mean, risk assessment is a whole other subject. And I can't remember who it was that said it, but we spend a lot of time and effort thinking about things that have very low probability of happening, and almost no time thinking about things that have a high probability of happening. That I found that to be fairly consistent throughout most of kink. And so it's that I think that those worst case scenario ideas are great. Just
but
because
the reason
they
why
can
I
reveal
do
a
that
lot.
is to save time in the air, because
Right.
I want to know that when a thing goes wrong, I just like execute, plan D or whatever. And then I don't have to be using that time. Like, I don't want to be in the midst of, falling slowly, slightly slower than the speed of gravity because of friction and trying to figure out what to do. I want to just know, like, yes, I knew this might happen. And here, now it's fixed. Everything's fine. Moving
Right.
on.
Yeah. And it's also a learned skill. I mean, if you spend all your time, not all your time, but if you spend a period of time imagining bad scenarios and imagining solutions to them, what you're doing is you're strengthening your solutions muscle in your brain. And so when the thing happens that you didn't think of, that is a surprise, which is, always that's the thing that happens, you're better prepared for it because you've had practice in coming up with solutions. Maybe my shirt's over my head, and I'm not vomiting, but I'm not sure. But my nose piercing is caught. Well, this is kind of like I can take Plan D and make it into Plan D/1 and change it. And so I think it's just a matter of preparedness in a lot of ways. I like the proliferation of what I've seen of a lot of role-playing disasters classes out there. I know that Jake Wing is going to teach one at ROPECRAFT. Shay and Stefanos have a few of them, one specifically for DMs, which is
I've done
great.
that. It's a great class.
It is fantastic. I was a demo bottom for that class. It's so fun. Oh, my God. It's always fun to demo bottom doing things wrong. It's just a blast. Was there any, I mean, and if the answer is no, we'll just move on, but was there any concerns at the border? Because I know a lot of people are worried about that, and there's a lot of horror stories out there that
I was not concerned for myself, but I certainly noticed a change from the last time that I went over the border at the same checkpoint. I don't recall ever being questioned by U.S. Customs and Border Police exiting the U.S. And there was extensive questioning for everyone exiting. There were 2 rounds of questioning by 2 different sets of officers. The first was just a passport check and a very brief question, I think, of how long are you going to be there, something like that. Nothing that seemed unusual. It's the same kinds of questions that the Canadian Border Police would ask at the, on the other side of that same checkpoint when entering Canada. Okay. But then there was a second round of questioning, which was in which the officer seemed to have a wide discretion to ask whatever he wanted. And he asked about protest activities. He asked about,
Wow.
yeah, he asked it. Yeah, I don't want to sort of go into detail because not that I would not even know their names, but I mean, there were a lot of questions that he asked about people's purchases. He asked, how could you afford those shoes? He asked the employment and locations of many different family members of people. He about half the people I was going over on a bus. About half the people on the bus were informed that their U.S. visas were canceled. It was not clear to me whether that was they had already been canceled as a result of the travel ban, or if he was at that moment canceling them. But yeah, there were also some people who he was. He was asking questions that were somewhat vague, and the person who spoke English but not as their first language was answering the questions, and I think a reasonable person would understand the answers that this person was giving as legitimate answers, but it was as if the officer was interpreting the ambiguous answer always in the way that made it seem suspicious. So he asked, like, do you have a home in Canada? And I think the person thought that meant, like, do you own a house in Canada? He's like, they live in Canada, but it's like they rent an apartment or something. And so then the officer was saying, like, oh, so you don't know a home in Canada? How could you be a Canadian resident? How could did you get this? Like, how did you get this card? You couldn't possibly have gotten this card if you didn't have a home in Canada. So you must have lied. And so I mean, just going down this road,
fucking with them.
Yeah, and it was. I've never encountered that either entering or exiting, and I've actually never encountered any kind of questioning other than just the quick passport check and when are you coming back, kind of how long are you going to be there, upon exiting the US. And coming back in, it was a different set of officers, and it was actually not as extensive questioning because my impression, and again, this is based on just one anecdotal example. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not doing broad research on this topic, but it gave me the impression that it was not a widespread policy to have more extensive questioning, but that the individual CBP officers now just have wider latitude to ask more questions if they want to, or not if they don't want to.
Right. One of the chilling quotes I heard was they were saying, our job just got more fun, which, is terrifying enough in a sadistic sense of the term.
Right.
Okay, that's actually good to know. But no problems with having rope. I mean, did you bring your own rope with you and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, they don't even check bags exiting the U.S. and entering the U.S. They put it through some sort of X-ray machine, and I think the main thing that they're looking for is agricultural products.
Right.
So don't bring fruits or meats or something back into the U.S. I'm sure they're also looking for weapons, but I mean, I had all my carabiners in my bag, and usually if I'm going through, say, TSA security at an airport, I will take all of those out of the bag and put them in a separate tray so everyone can see, yes, that big metal object, you see what it is.
Right.
And otherwise it always gets stopped and they have to open the bag, and it's, it takes more time. But if they just look at it and then they say, is this for rock climbing? And I say, yes. And then I go on my way. So I did not take those out of my bag entering the US, because they just said, like, don't just put everything in. You don't have to take anything out of the bag. You don't have to take computers out or anything. And that didn't set off any alarms. I've never had rope be any kind of problem It's usually
Yeah, I haven't either.
because they're metal.
I'm just,
Or one time I had some anal hooks that I was bringing through TSA, and those are also big and metal, and they were taken out, and the person who was doing the security check looked at it and asked he said, what is this? And I was trying to figure out how to answer that, and then he just asked another question. He said, is this a hand tool? And I was also not entirely sure how to answer that. And he said, because hand tools are not allowed on the plane. And I said, well, no, it's not a hand tool. So I appreciated him telling me the correct answer to the question. That is not a hand. And as soon as, he's just like, okay, good. I don't know what it is. That's fine. Go back in there.
That actually,
I think basically I am a white female presenting U.S. citizen who speaks English fluently and is not. I am the opposite of someone who would be profiled. I am someone who, like, the TSA tells me the right answer to the question that they are asking. So I'm not the person who is going to be targeted, and so what works for me.
Well, I appreciate your observation too, though, of the way that other people were treated. That is definitely helpful to hear the actual experiences of people as opposed to the various things we read about. So. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about today, because we're running over time, but that's okay. This is definitely worth it. This is again a delicate segue. Aside from anal hooks, we should acknowledge you as the inventor of the wasabi lubesicle as well.
Well, thank you. I think that you were certainly the inspiration for it. You came up with the title. I just figured out the execution.
You certainly
Again, if someone
did.
tells me that something is like a thing that somebody would never do, I'm like, but couldn't we? What if we did?
Yeah, and I keep on thinking that I'm being more careful when I make up things so that it doesn't happen again, but it keeps happening, as Lizard can tell you. But anyway, the another thing that sticks out in my memory, I wasn't even there for it to happen, but I have heard it recounted several times, is that you had a scene with Naya a while back, and she kind of gets this glazed look in her eye and goes rope and boots and rope when she talks about it. So you are a fan of boot play as well and going into ropes, and that's why we asked you for that particular class along with a couple of others for ROPECRAFT. Do you want to spend a little time talking about what you're going to bring to ROPECRAFT, just so that I can give a little promotion?
Sure. Yeah, I'm really excited to be presenting at ROPECRAFT. It'll be my first time coming to ROPECRAFT, and I'm really excited to go. I've done your rope in space and GRU, and I think this will be a whole other level of great answer rope and other kink convention. So I'm teaching this class that's on trampling and boots and rope. These are two great tastes that go great together, in my opinion. Two things that I like a lot, and I think I know a lot of people who do a lot of rope with like no shoes on tatami mats, and the idea of, and that's great. I end up doing that a lot too. The main rope dojo space in my area is a no shoes on the mats kind of place, so usually I'm not wearing any shoes there, but I do like boots for all the different kinds of sensations that they can produce, different kinds of pressure on different body parts, and using that in combination with other kinds of body manipulation with rope is very fun, I think. So I will demonstrate some different possible techniques, and also I also want to talk about in the class. Part of what that class is showing like how intense certain things are, because I think people who are either not used to doing like standing on people with or up or without boots in different ways might not know how much different things hurt, and it's good to know how much different things hurt, so that they hurt as much as you want them to hurt. So that's what part of that class will be about.
Nice.
You know, how to gauge the intensity a little more precisely, and especially when there's like partial suspension and that sort of thing involved, and also just how to, you know, what are good ties that will restrain someone so you can step on them, and so that maybe if you don't want to step on the rope's not in the way for the body parts that, you know, you want to have.
Right.
Like, I really like rope marks, and I also really like boot marks, but if you have them on top of each other, then they like get in the way of each. So having the rope around the boot mark area, so there's enough room for effective boot print on thigh or whatever body part.
Yeah.
And then also just using a suspension frame as a convenient
yes.
thing to hold on to so you don't fall down when stepping on someone.
That was how I found out I was into that kind of thing. I had a scene with a, I won't say who it is because I don't have her permission to share it, but she was much smaller than me. And we thought we were going to be doing a rope and suspension scene, but for some reason the urge was to tie her stretched out between the bases of the frame, and I put up a hard point and hung on to the hard point, and I discovered I had a fetish for pixie stomping, which is the way I looked at it, and it was a lot of fun. She enjoyed it quite a bit too. So yeah, that class, when we saw that was offered, we were just like, yep, that's one. Do you want to talk about the other two you're going to possibly do? Well, we should add this caveat: all classes right up until the moment you're walking in the classroom are subject to change. So your boots might get confiscated by the border or something. And well, you're not going over a border, but you know, yeah. Yeah,
who knows? I think I actually will be coming from overseas to ROPECRAFT because I will be in Europe for the month before. I'm going to teach at Anatomy Studio in London earlier on in May. Yeah, I'm really excited about that. And so I will actually be coming from overseas to ROPECRAFT.
So if your boots are so things could change, but let's talk about the other two classes.
So the other two classes, one is on suspension line tie-offs. I was talking before about, you know, from super secure to quickest release, lots of different ways to tie off suspension lines. And so that class is a very technical class. It's all about what the upline tie-off, this very essential part of a suspension, but it's not about tying on a person. It's just focused on this very precise part of the suspension line that goes, you know, from the harness or to the hard point, and what's going on between there, and how to tie those off in some different ways, and why you might use one or another in different scenarios. And then the final class is partial suspension transitions, which is basically like pretty much every rope scene that I do is partial suspension transitions. Like, I don't do I like scenes that last a long time and have people in a lot of different positions, and full suspensions tire people out a lot more quickly. So I don't tend to do those, at least not for, you know, the entirety of a scene. Maybe there's, you know, a full suspension, but then, you know, go down to partial suspensions, do that. And for
give
a while,
them a little break. Yeah.
Right. Also, then, you know, you can like step on the person on the floor. So you can see my interests all come together. But I think that it's also, it's a way to think about transitions that doesn't require the intensity or maybe difficulty of being in the air, especially for the bottoms. Like, if you know, I see a lot of classes that are suspension transition classes, and because the first time you're tying something probably takes a little while to learn it and to execute it, that maybe a position that someone would only want to be in for like 1 minute, you have to be in it for 5 minutes the first time that you're in it, and that's not so fun. Or at least, you know, it can be a pretty challenging and exhausting thing. So I think that it's helpful to kind of learn about transitions, and while there's still some body part that's on the ground, and that maybe it's not as physically intense for the people being tied, as if it were a full suspension class. Although I will say, basically every one of the partial transitions I'm going to teach can be a full suspension if the bottom just wants it to be. Like, it's, just take your foot off the floor.
That was my first suspension. I had a partial suspension and the bottom lifted their foot up and I went, oh my God, don't. Oh, it held. So, never mind.
But like there's always the option to take that pressure off and then just go back to being a partial suspension.
Cool. Well, we are definitely excited to have you there, and we'll be looking forward to it. Not the least, you frankly fall into that category, and there's not a lot of people like this, but you are one of the people who, I don't care what you're teaching, I will go to that class and because I know I will learn something, and I will enjoy watching you teach it, because you are a fantastic presenter. You have a brain that makes my brain sort of stretch. And this has been consistent from the first time. I can't remember the first time we met, but it's been consistent. I have learned so much from you.
Connecticut Grew in 2009, and actually you're the person who told me that I could teach, because at that point I thought, I don't know, like I have some thoughts and opinions about things, but I'm not any kind of expert, so I shouldn't be teaching anything. And you said your line that I've heard you say many times since then, that if you're passionate about it, you should teach it. If you're passionate about it, you can teach it. And so you deserve credit for all of my rope teaching. It all started with you.
Lucky for me, because I've learned so much from you over the years. So great. Any final thoughts you want to leave people with? How can people get a hold of you or find out more about what you're teaching or where you're teaching?
So, I will be teaching next at Bound in Boston in the last weekend in March. Actually, right before that, I'm teaching in Boston at the Boston Rope Bite. I'm teaching a self-suspension double feature of a Foundations of Self-Suspension class and a Dynamic Self-Suspension class. And then I will be teaching at Bondage Expo Dallas, and then at Anatomy in London, and then at ROPECRAFT. I am on FetLife as Ropeboi, ROPEBOI, and that is a good way for people to reach me.
Excellent. And if people have questions, you can always email me, greatanswer@protonmail.com, and I will pass them on to Parker, and we will give any kind of comments and get you back here. Well, thank you very much for taking the time this morning. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Gray. It's been great chatting with you.
Absolutely. I want to thank Parker for the time that she took to do the research before this, and also for bringing this stuff to our attention. I mean, as you can tell, I just want to listen to Parker talk about Parker's ideas forever and ever, because they're always interesting. And she tends to do the things that people say is impossible and does them well. So I hope that you will come to ROPECRAFT and see her there, or see her at one of the other places that she mentioned that she was going to be teaching. And if you go to one of those, just know that I will be very envious of you. I want to thank again our sponsors for this podcast. TwistedMonk.com makes fantastic hand-dyed rope and specialty rope, also for bondage, as well as many other wonderful things. And also JapaneseBound.com, where you can, if you find that learning from the masters seems really inaccessible, as Oranis mentioned recently on Twitter, you can find that there are places where you can actually learn from them still, maybe not in person, but you can get at least some exposure to their teachings and help support them at the same time. JapaneseBound.com. So meanwhile, this is Great Answer, still without a good tagline, but let me tell you, we are the place where we are trying to make the resistance sexy.